Ever wonder what it's like to take the throne when your empire is crumbling? Imagine stepping into power right after a catastrophic military defeat, with enemies at your gates and rebellion brewing within. This wasn't a nightmare. It was the reality for Abdul Hamid I, the 27th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. His story is a gripping tale of trying to steer a sinking ship through a perfect storm. When Abdul Hamid ascended to the throne in 1774, the Ottoman Empire was reeling. His brother, Mustafa III, had just died, and the devastating Russo-Turkish War was reaching its disastrous conclusion. The empire was bankrupt, the army was in disarray, and the ink was still drying on a humiliating peace treaty. Abdul Hamid wasn't a young, battle-hardened prince. He had spent over 40 years in the cafes, the gilded cage within the Topkapi Palace where potential heirs were confined to prevent succession crises. While this kept him safe from political intrigue, it also left him completely detached from the world of governance, military strategy, and diplomacy. He was a pious, well-meaning man, but was that enough to save an empire on the brink? The first and most bitter pill Abdul Hamid had to swallow was the Treaty of Kenarka, signed just months into his reign. This treaty was a body blow to the Ottoman Empire. Its terms were crushing. The Crimean Khanate, a loyal vassal state for centuries and a heartland of Turkic and Muslim culture, was declared independent. But this was just a smokescreen. Everyone knew it was the first step toward Russia's eventual annexation, which happened less than a decade later. The loss of Crimea was not just a territorial blow. It was a profound psychological and symbolic defeat. The Sultan, the Caliph of all Muslims, had failed to protect a Muslim land from a Christian power. But the treaty didn't stop there. Russia also gained strategic territories on the Black Sea coast, effectively ending the Ottoman monopoly over its waters. Russian merchant ships were granted free passage through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, opening up the Mediterranean to them. Perhaps most significantly, Russia was declared the official protector of the Orthodox Christian subjects within the Ottoman Empire. This was a diplomatic masterstroke by Catherine the Great. It gave Russia a permanent, legitimate excuse to meddle in Ottoman internal affairs, sponsoring unrest and citing the mistreatment of Christians. As a pretext for future conflicts, the empire's sovereignty was fundamentally compromised. For Abdul Hamid, a deeply religious man, this was a catastrophe. He had to begin his reign by surrendering Muslim lands and granting a rival power influence over his own subjects. The treasury was so empty that he reportedly couldn't even pay the traditional accession bonuses to the Janissaries, the elite infantry troops, leading to immediate unrest in the capital. His reign started not with a bang, but with the whimpers of a defeated and humiliated empire. Faced with this dire situation, Abdul Hamid knew that something had to change. He couldn't reverse the treaty, but he could try to fix the deep-seated problems that led to the defeat. He recognized that the military, once the most feared in the world, was now a shadow of its former self. The Janissaries were undisciplined, corrupt, and more interested in business and politics than in fighting. The navy was outdated, and the officer corps was filled with appointments based on patronage rather than merit. So Abdul Hamid, despite his secluded upbringing, embarked on a series of ambitious reforms. He wasn't a military genius like past sultans, but he was a pragmatist. He knew he needed outside help. He brought in European advisors, particularly from France, to help modernize the Ottoman military. Engineers like François Tott were hired to build new foundries, improve artillery, and establish schools for naval and engineering officers. A new, modern artillery corps was created, and efforts were made to update the Navy's shipbuilding techniques. He even tried to conduct a census of the Janissaries to root out ghost soldiers' names on the payroll who didn't actually exist, but this met with fierce resistance from the corrupt corps. Beyond the military, Abdul Hamid also attempted to tackle the administrative decay. He was known for his piety and his concern for justice. He tried to streamline the bureaucracy, crack down on corruption, and improve the state's finances. He was a hands-on ruler, often visiting shops and markets in disguise to see the state of his city and hear the concerns of his people. He also invested in public works, most notably establishing a new fire brigade for Constantinople, a city plagued by devastating fires. He was a builder, a reformer, a man trying to put out fires both literal and metaphorical. But for every step forward, it seemed the empire was pushed 2 steps back. The internal weaknesses were just too profound. The central government's authority had eroded over decades. Powerful local notables, known as ayans, ruled vast swaths of the Balkans and Anatolia like their own personal fiefdoms, often defying the sultan's orders and withholding tax revenues. Uprisings were common. In Egypt, the Mamluk Beys once again asserted their autonomy. In Syria and Lebanon, local rulers challenged Istanbul's control. The empire was fraying at the seams, and Abdul Hamid simply didn't have the resources or the military muscle to reassert central authority everywhere at once. His reform efforts, though well-intentioned, were often stymied by powerful vested interests. The Janissaries resisted any change that threatened their privileges. The conservative, clerical establishment, the ulama, were suspicious of European-style reforms, viewing them as an unwelcome foreign influence. Abdul Hamid had to walk a tightrope, trying to modernize without alienating the traditional pillars of Ottoman power. It was an almost impossible task. He was trying to repair a complex machine while it was still running, with many of its parts actively resisting the repairs. While Abdul Hamid wrestled with internal decay, the Russian bear was not sleeping. Catherine the Great saw the Treaty of Kenarka not as an end, but as a beginning. Her ambition was the so-called Greek project, a grand plan to dismantle the Ottoman Empire in Europe, restore a new Byzantine empire centered in Constantinople with her grandson on the throne, and push the Turks back into Asia. The annexation of Crimea in 1783 was the first major move. Abdul Hamid, knowing his military was not ready, was forced to accept this bitter loss through a convention. The humiliation was immense, and the war hawks in his court grew louder. The pressure mounted. Russia continued to provoke the Ottomans, expanding its influence in the Caucasus and interfering in the Balkans. Finally, in 1787, bowing to public and political pressure, Abdul Hamid declared war on Russia once again. He may have hoped that his reforms had made enough of a difference, or perhaps he simply felt he had no other choice to preserve the empire's honor. Austria soon joined the war on Russia's side, and the Ottomans found themselves fighting a two-front war against two of Europe's great powers. The war was a disaster from the start. The reformed military units fought bravely but were too few and too new to turn the tide. The old, unreformed parts of the army proved unreliable and ineffective. The Austrians advanced in the west, while the Russians, led by the legendary General Suvorov, won a series of crushing victories. The key fortress of Akhov on the Black Sea fell to the Russians in 1788 after a brutal siege. The news of the fortress's fall and the massacre of its inhabitants that followed is said to have devastated Abdul Hamid. His health, already fragile, began to fail. He had gambled on war to restore Ottoman prestige and had lost everything. The defeat was more total and more humiliating than the one that had begun his reign. In the spring of 1789, just as the campaigning season was about to begin, Abdul Hamid suffered a fatal stroke. He died at the age of 64, having reigned for 15 years. He left behind an empire in an even more perilous state than he had found it. The war was lost, the treasury was empty, and enemy armies were deep inside Ottoman territory. So how should we remember Abdul Hamid I? He's often overshadowed by more dynamic rulers, Seen as a tragic figure who presided over a period of decline, he was no military conqueror or revolutionary statesman, but to dismiss him as a failure is too simple. He was a man of integrity and piety who inherited an impossible situation. He correctly identified the empire's key weaknesses: military backwardness, administrative corruption, and internal fragmentation, and made a genuine effort to address them. His reforms, though limited in their immediate success, laid the groundwork for the more sweeping changes his successors, like his nephew Selim III, would attempt. He was a transitional figure, a man caught between the old world and the new, who tried his best to save an empire that was already in a state of terminal decline. His reign is a poignant reminder that good intentions are not always enough to reverse the tide of history. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the tumultuous reign of Abdul Hamid I interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the crossroads of history. We'll see you in the next one.